After finishing 15th in the league and missing out on European football, I think it's safe to say most United fans were expecting a disappointing transfer window. But United have gotten out of the gate strong and they've already landed Cunha, and it looks like Mbeumo is just around the corner. So this video is going to be looking at how we can build on that and go on to build a team that can actually challenge for the top 6 and maybe even the top 4. I'll go over the sales and signings I'd like to see as well as their fees, and I've also got a free agent signed in here that I haven't really seen anyone else mention before. Now I won't be going too in depth into the technical fit of each player, but I will have a general look at their fit, and if you want to see a video on the tactical fit of each player, let me know in the comments down below and I'll get working on that for you guys. So I'll be working off 3 main assumptions for this video. One is that Mbeumo is going to come in for about 60 mil. 2 is that as a result of him coming in, Ahmad's going to be playing most of his minutes at right wing back. And 3 is that we'll have a net transfer budget of about 85 million. Now looking at the previous year's spendings, we had about 110, 120 million net transfer spend. So I think 85 million is realistic given the amount of talk around how our finances are limited for this year. So with Cunha and Mbeumo costing a combined 120 million, we will already be about 35 million over our budget. And I'll have this number in the top right so you guys can see and track this number changing as we go along. So that does mean that we'll have to work on some sales before we can look to bring in that third signing. It looks like at United, all the players that are destined to be on their way out already are, well, all of our wingers. From these 4 players, it looks like Antony and Garnacho are going to be the easiest to move on. Antony, thanks to his good form at Betis, should bring in at least 35 mil. And Garnacho, while I think we should be looking to get 60 to 70 mil, all the reports are saying we're looking at more like 45 to 50. So let's go with 45. Now I will add that we should be looking to put in some extra add-on fees for these players hitting to maybe like 15 or 20 goals and assists, and that should be for an extra like 10 to 15 mil. I think this is a good way to prevent United getting shafted on prices like we have done in the past over and over. Since this is add-on fees though, I won't count this towards our budget. If these do get triggered, it'll just be great for us in the January window as it'll give us a nice little boost. As for Sancho and Rashford, they look like they'll be a little bit more difficult to move on. Sancho's relatively low asking fee of 15 million means he should still be doable relatively early in the window. And I will be adding a £5 million fee from Chelsea onto this to make it 20 million onto our budget. Now for Rashford, he seems to be holding out for Barcelona, which means that might take a little longer, but when it does eventually get done, I think we should at least get 30 million from this deal. Ultimately, all this really means is that we might have to wait for him to be moved on before we can make the last signing I'm going to propose. With those sales completed, we'll be able to pay off the remaining 35 million on Mbeumo and have 95 million left to spend, or 65 mil if you're not counting Rashford as of yet. That does mean we can start looking at bringing in our third signing in the summer. And for me, the priority has to be a striker. The obvious choice here is Gyökeres. And while this looked like a pipe dream just a week ago, with Arsenal now moving in on Sesko and closing in on that deal, it looks like we might actually have a free run at this guy. And with the asking price of 60 million, I feel like that's actually a fair deal. The only other elite option we have here is Osman, and while I do prefer him for his overall aerial ability and slightly better ball control and first touch, I think his off the field antics and slightly questionable demeanour and character does mean that I think Gyökeres is our man. And with Amorim also feeling that way, I think we have to give the manager what he wants, and Gyökeres has to be our top target. Now if we can't get him, I would be looking at a Yusuf En-Nesyri or a Alexander Sørloth from Atletico Madrid. Yusuf En-Nesyri would be more of a specialist striker that's going to be dominating the aerial battles, while Sørloth would be more of the well-rounded player that can do a bit of everything but doesn't do anything to that elite level. Ultimately though, I think we will land Gyökeres here, so it'll be him coming in for 60 mil. Looking at this lineup now, it's already looking a lot better. There are still 3 main positions where I think we can massively upgrade. Hardest of which is probably going to be that central midfield spot, where we might be able to get a top level player in this summer, but it's more likely going to be next. So I'm going to give a few options for that, but I'll get onto that towards the end. The second spot would be a better left-footed centre back, and I probably wouldn't be looking at this if Martinez was always available for us. but with him being so injury prone for us recently, I think we have to look at maybe getting a bit of an upgrade there. And finally, it would be that left back spot. Now, you could say this for the left back and the right back spot, but there's only so much we can do in 1 year. So with Amarim also showing that he kind of wants to play Dorgu on that right back spot sometimes, I think I'd be going in for a starting caliber left back this year. And this is where we have a unique opportunity in the market to bring in someone. And what if I told you there was a player out there that's played for a club that finished higher than United in the Premier League this year? He's a starting left back or left midfielder. He already plays in a 3-back system, and he's got 5 assists in the league this year. And on top of all of that, he's absolutely free. That man is Tyreek Mitchell. His contract is set to be expiring at the end of the year, and I don't know why not many other people are looking at him. Yeah, he's not the absolute elite of elite players. He's not top gravy, but he's a very solid Premier League proven player, and I think that's going to be so important for us. So if we can land him on a free, that would be great. Now, I did see one post online claiming that his contract is actually expiring in 2027 and not this year, but I didn't really see anything else backing that up. So I'm going under the assumption that this is expiring this summer and we'll be able to maybe get this deal through. Just in case we can't though, I will also be providing an alternative option. But first I want to discuss why it's so important to bring in a left back this year. Now, Dorgu's coming in and he's actually been pretty decent for us. He's not been a world beater, no, but he's been solid, and I think he's even been better than what he was expected to do. Realistically, he was supposed to come in and only become a starter in 2, maybe 3 more years from now. Bringing in Mitchell is going to give him that time and allow us to develop him correctly. On top of that, we don't really have any other cover at that spot, whereas at right back we do have a couple of options, and we've often seen Bellow fill in at left back and do a really poor job there. And with this signing, one of the main benefits is that we would then be able to look at moving on Bellow, and when we do, I think we could even get about 30 mil for him, but I'm going to keep it as a bit more realistic and say 20 million. And with him being sold for that price, we'd now have about 55 million in the budget, and we'd have upgraded our left back spot. If the reports of his contract being until 2027 are true, or we just can't convince Mitchell to sign for us, then I think the alternate option I have is actually one that's a much better player, and that's Theo Hernandez from AC Milan. Now, the reports coming out are that AC Milan did accept a €35 million package, that's including add-ons, and I think at that price, he's an absolute bargain. For me, Theo Hernandez is everything a modern day fullback should be. Pace, power, tenacity, all mixed with great technical ability. I think if you were to go across all of the players in Europe and pick out a player for that left wing back position, I think it'd be between him and Alphonso Davies, and getting him at 30 million is an absolute steal. And he would be my preferred option over Tyreek Mitchell, but the 30 million spent on him would mean that we'd have to sacrifice a few of the later signings coming up. And I think there are ways where it could still work, and I'll go over a couple of scenarios at the end where we end up with Mitchell or with Theo Hernandez. If we can't end up with neither of these, I'd rather just not sign another left back, because we'd be spending more than 30 million on someone that's nowhere near the quality, and at that point I'd rather just put the funds towards upgrading and the other 2 signings. I'll go over some scenarios where we get either of these and how that impacts the rest of the signings and the overall squad at the end of the video. Moving on to that central midfield spot, this is a pivotal signing for us. We seem to always lack a level of balance in our midfield, and I think that's always going to be quite difficult to achieve given that Bruno's playing in one of those spots. We're going to need someone who's strong and physical while being mobile, and also being good defensively and strong on the ball. We basically need an all-rounder, and that's just quite hard to find. By the time the signing does happen, it's likely going to be towards the end of the window, so Rashford should be gone by then. And that transfer budget in the top right of 55 million should be accurate, and I don't think this will be enough to bring in a top quality central midfielder that we need. So we'll have to have a look at some more outs before we can really look at this signing. This is the list of players that I think United can be looking to move on, but would be quite challenging to actually pull off. From this list, Shaw and Mount are probably an impossibility due to their injury record, and I think the most likely of these to go would be Casemiro and Højlund. We should be able to sell Casemiro for at least 10 million. And just getting his wages off the book will save us about 18 million just in this year. I think about 8 million of that will have to go towards the actual signing we make for the central midfield. And I think along with that, Dallow's wage savings will also help get that signing through. So I'll add about 20 million to our budget from the sale of Casemiro. As for Rasmus, he looks like he'd be more likely to go on a loan than a permanent signing. There's talk about a move to Italy, but nothing's concrete yet, and I think even if something does happen, it'll most likely be a loan. So I'll add on 5 million to our budget for a small loan fee and the savings of his wages. So that would bring our transfer budget all the way back up to 80 million if we did get Tyreek Mitchell on free. Or if we ended up spending that 30 million on Theo Hernandez, we'd be sat at about 50 million. And that should be enough to go and pursue a centre midfield target. Now, given that this is happening fairly late in the transfer window, I think it's probably unrealistic to actually go and get that £80 million central midfielder, but I wanted to give the options just in case it does happen. I think in the realistic scenario that I'm going to lay out, it's actually going to be the more budget-friendly options that I'll outline. The first thing I do here would be to go to the likes of Madrid and just inquire about Tchouaméni and Camavinga. Now, most likely they're not going to be available, but they do have too many midfielders at that club, and not everyone's going to be able to get games. If an opportunity was to arise as a result of that, I think United should position themselves to take advantage of it. Some more realistic targets, however, would be Boubacar Kamara of Aston Villa and Bellow of Brighton. Kamara, I do think, is the better player on current ability, but in terms of their ceiling, I think Bellow has a much higher ceiling than Kamara. That does come with a price though, as Brighton is notoriously hard to deal with, and we'd probably be looking at paying 80 million with add-ons just to secure him. And I think that kind of deal is probably one that's more likely to happen next year and not this year. Kamara, on the other hand, I think we should be able to get for about 65 mil with some add-ons, and I think that should be realistic given Aston Villa's current FFP situations. If the budget was a little tighter due to the signing of Theo Hernandez, we still have some pretty good options, mainly Felix Mmeche and Khéphren Thuram. I think both of these guys are solid options that bring in a lot of the much needed athleticism into our midfield. And while I do like Khéphren Thuram's overall ability better, I think it's clear both from the eye test and from the stats that Mmeche will provide a bit more of that defensive work and provide a more balanced midfield when playing next to Bruno. For that reason, if we were to go for these budget options, I'd be going with Mmeche, but I think both should be available for that 35 to 45 million pound mark. Now, this last signing is probably the first one I'd cross off the list if the budget was tight, and that's partially just because of how much I love Lisandro Martinez. And while I love his fire and determination, and I think he's a great leader to have in the team, I think if he's not going to be available for 60 to 70% of the time like he hasn't been for the last 2 years, it would be actually just smart business to try and move him on now while there is some interest from the likes of Napoli, and then go and put some money on top of that to upgrade him. Now, after those central midfield signings, we actually wouldn't have any budget, but this is where we'd have to rely on some income from some of the sell-on fees on players like Alvaro Fernandez, Anthony Elanga, Maxio Yedeli, and of course Mason Greenwood too. I think we can expect to get at least £20 million if these players are moved on, and if on top of that we can sell Martinez for about £40 million, then I think it'd be something that's worth taking, because we can look to upgrade him for something like a Piero Hincapié or a Nico Schlotterbeck. Hincapié would be the more natural fit for the system since he already plays at a 3-back, but Schlotterbeck provides us with a bit of versatility to adjust to a few different scenarios. For example, if Maguire wasn't playing as well next season and we needed to move De Ligt to the right-sided centre-back position, he would be well suited to playing that central centre-back role and even make that a permanent position long-term if the likes of Heaven and Kakonki are developing well and we want to give them a natural pathway into that first team. For those reasons, Schlotterbeck would be my top target for about 60 to 65 mil with some add-ons, and Hincapié would be a close second for about 50 to 55. Between the income generated from all of our sales and the funds from those sell-on clauses, we should be able to make all of these signings happen. But since this plan is reliant on free agent signings and some sales to make the incomings happen, I wanted to go over a couple of different scenarios of how the team could look depending on how things go for us in the window. This is what the team would look like in a pessimistic scenario where we don't get to land Tyreek Mitchell on a free, meaning we do have to spend that 30 million on Theo Hernandez. And the incoming from sell-on clauses is a little lower, maybe something like 10 to 15 mil. And we struggle to move on one of our harder to sell players like Casemiro or Sancho. We'd still have all the funds that we need to get that brand new front line, which for me is good enough to compete with the best in the league. And we'd have the best in class at left back with Theo Hernandez. Now, given that we're spending that money on him, we won't have so much for the other two signings, and we'll probably end up with an Mmeche at central midfield. And as a result, we probably won't move on Lisandro Martinez and stick with the same back three. For me, this is the baseline of what United can achieve this summer. But let's look at a more optimistic scenario, where some things do still go wrong, but for the majority it goes right for us. There are two possible teams here, one where we get Mitchell on free, and one where we spend the 30 million on Theo Hernandez. I wanted to show both of these teams because I thought it's an interesting debate on which is actually better. So let me know in the comments down below which of these you actually prefer. In the scenario with Mitchell, the extra funds can be used to upgrade both the centre back and the central midfield spots. So I've got Kamara in there with Slotterbeck at left centre back. On the other hand, when we spend that extra 30 on Theo Hernandez, we do downgrade in the centre back and the central midfield position to something like a Felix Mmecha and a Hincapié. Now I think both these teams are a massive upgrade on what we currently have. They have the pace, athleticism and dynamism to actually dominate games in the Premier League and in the future, even in the Champions League. And looking at their age profiles, it's clear that the best of this team is still ahead of them. It's also worth noting that United can actually do better than this. That's because we actually have 17 million per year coming off our wage books from letting go of Eriksen, Lindelof and Evans. And on top of that, I think we can actually get more than the 20 to 25 million that I allocated for from our sell-on bonuses. But I didn't want to include all of that because I just felt like it was unrealistic that everything would go right. So this is still a semi-realistic scenario that's a little bit more optimistic than the previous one I showed you. For me, I think the versatility that Slotterbeck gives and the extra guaranteed performance from Kamara over Mmecha since he's Premier League proven means that I do slightly prefer the scenario with Tyreek Mitchell coming in. It's a close one though, because like I said, I do love Theo Hernandez. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And that's going to be it for this video. And be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the follow-up video to this, where I'm going to do a deep dive into the tactical setup with this team.